Thank you, Stefan. So as already introduced by Stefan, I'm going to talk about the Bevy game template. And first of all, this is a screenshot from GitHub. So it is a public template on GitHub. It has this fancy green button on the top right. Use this template. You can just click it. You get your own repository based on the template. The whole idea is to have a third-party starting point for any kind of Bevy application. And I started this beginning of 2021 because I was joining game jams, and I pretty quickly noticed that I had to copy a lot of boilerplates every time I joined a new jam. I spent a lot of time on things outside of actually developing a game. So I tried to cut down on that. I had 3 points that I focused on. The first one was I wanted this to be cross-platform, because the more platforms you support, the more people can play your game, the more ratings and feedback you get. I wanted it to be as much automated as possible. So I wanted a lot of CI/CD. I wanted some workflows running on GitHub, building and bundling everything for me. And I wanted it to be extendable. This point is pretty easy with Bevy, I would actually say. I just didn't want the template to be in the way in case my 2-day, 3-day little game jam project was so nice, so fun to work with that I continue working on it and it would grow a bit. So that was the starting point. And I am going to quickly show you what the repository itself looks like, just so you have a rough overview. So I have it checked out here. We have the workflows. We will talk more about them later. There is the assets directory that you all know with some image files in it and some audio files in this case. The build directory is specific for the CD pipelines. So there's a bunch of files in here for some platforms that require some configurations and some special icon formats and so on. The credits directory, you can put some information like licenses for dependencies and so on. It will be automatically included in any packaged version of your game later on. Then the mobile, this is a crate actually. This is the entry point for Android and iOS, which need a little bit more special setup compared to the other platforms. So this has its own crate. SRC is the top level crate really. So here we have the entry point for the desktop platforms and the web platform. Then we have a lib file and we have a bunch of modules. So this is where you will actually write code and put like your own modules and plugins into. That's about it. So we will go into more detail on the following slides. So I'm going to look at these 3 focus points here: cross-platform, CI/CD, extendable, and I will try to pull some learnings out of every one of these points. I hope there's something interesting for everyone here. First point, cross-platform setup. So what I mean by that is that I wanted to support all the official Bevy platforms. In the beginning, that was at least the ones I considered in the beginning. It was Linux, Windows, Mac, and web. And for a year now or so, roughly, the template also supports Android and iOS. So at the moment, it's 6 different platforms. You already saw the folder with the platform-specific files for packaging. I find this is the nicest way of organizing them inside this repository, so they're not cluttering everything else. And I try to have a minimal structure. So while I support 6 platforms, some of them have some special needs, mostly the mobile ones. So it made sense to split into 2 crates, but I didn't want to go into more than that. So for the cross-platform setup, there's a lot you have to do in CI/CD. But what I wanted to focus on here for learnings was things that you have to do in code and that Bevy doesn't really help you with, at least not yet. So it's 2 small things I wanted to mention there. The first one is just in case you can't actually play things on Windows. So if you just work on Linux like me, you might not know that if you run your game later on Windows, you will always get a terminal opening up from your executable. Most likely this is not what you want in your game, and it's really easy to fix. I have also linked the cheat book on these slides, and there's going to be a link to the slides later in the description or in the YouTube chat, so you can just click on the link, you don't have to remember it. The cheatbook has a lot of good information on different platforms. The second point is about icons. Now, there's a lot of icons you're going to want to set. I'm not talking about the ones maybe your players see inside the games. I'm talking about the ones that are around it. So, for example, the icon of the executable or an icon on the window. In some cases, things like the favicon, for example, you have to set when you actually build your game for a certain platform. But in the case of the executable icon for Windows, and in the case of the taskbar and the window icon for Windows and X11 Linux, this is something you need to configure inside code. So for the first point, for the executable icon, it will be a build file. You can take a look at the game template to actually look at the code of the build file or at the cheatbook. And in the case of the window icon for taskbar or like in the corner of the window, this is something that has been attempted to be configurable through Bevy a couple of times. I'm aware of some issues and some pull requests, but as far as I know, nothing has been merged yet, and we have to drop down one level in the API. So we need to directly talk to the dependencies of Bevy. So in this case here, this window is actually not a Bevy window, it's a Winit window. And onside the window, you can call this function set window icon. Again, this is something you can find in the templates and on the cheatbook if you want to see the code. Okay, so those were two learnings to maybe be aware of for cross-platform support. Now let's go to CI/CD, or as I call it here in the title, automate what you can. This is just a very general learning, just automate wherever you can. And especially if you do things like game jams, it's really, really helpful to not have to worry about builds, because at least for me, I usually get very stressed out at the end anyways, but then there's no time left to really care about getting working builds for all your targets. On the right, you can see the workflow directory of the template. There's 5 YAML files in there. First of all, we have a simple CI pipeline. So this is a CI YAML. It will just do things like check the format, check linting, run cargo tests in case you have unit tests. The template doesn't really have any logic, so there are no unit tests, but you might have some. Then the next kind of pipeline is the release YAML, which builds release for all 6 platforms. So if this workflow runs, at the end, you get a release on GitHub with 6 files attached to it. Most of them are some kind of archives, and one per platform. The web one and Linux, Windows, and Mac ones, they are just, well, you can directly distribute them. You can just upload them to itch.io and they will just work. The 2 mobile platforms are a little bit special because for you to be able to release them on the store, you need to have accounts. You need to configure a bunch of secrets. The accounts are actually paid, right? You need to pay to get access to the developer program for Google and for Apple. So for those, I have some special separate workflows. Those are the release Android and release iOS ones. I have some blog posts describing how to set them up. They are linked on the slide here. So in case you want to configure those, you need to have the developer accounts for the platform and then go through the blog posts. It takes a couple of minutes. The mobile platforms are still a little bit more complicated than the other ones. On to the last point, extendable. Now, the first thing here, in my opinion, is to just use Bevy plugins, like really, really use Bevy plugins, order everything into them. This is the first level of code organization. Organize your things into plugins and then combine your plugins to a top level one. I have had really good experience with that kind of code structure. The second one is if you have some Bevy plugins in your game that don't really have dependencies, they don't change often, you might want to consider to move them into a separate crate. And just to make this like a tiny, tiny bit easier, the game template is already a workspace. So you just have to add the name of the crate to the workspace section and you're good to go. And then the final, and in my opinion, the most important point here is how do you actually organize your code into plugins? So how do you decide what goes into what plugin? And here, I would say organize it by domain. Something that works also very well for things like microservices, in case anybody of you is working in that domain. But it's the same way that Bevy organizes plugins internally. And this is also the way, in my opinion, to go when you're writing a game using Bevy. I've seen some other ways of organizing things, like having a systems.rs file or resources.rs file and then put them all in there. I really don't like this. I don't think it scales well. And I'm going to show you one more thing about why I think this is a really good way to go. First of all, what this means in the case of the template is if we look at the files again, we have the lib and the main file. Then we have audio.rs, loading.rs, menu.rs, and player.rs. Those are really the domains. So the audio.rs will only care about audio. Loading will only care about asset loading. Menu and player, the same thing. As an example, if we look at the code in audio.rs, there's only one public item in here, and that's the plugin itself. Then we add some other plugins. So this could be Bevy Audio, or in this case, it's Bevy Kira Audio. Same thing. We need to add this audio plugin. We have two systems. We have a resource. They are all not exported. And outside of this module, all we do is we import internal audio plugin. We add it to our app, and our game has audio. Now, as a second example, don't look too close at the functions here. This is Bevy 0.5, like somewhere beginning of 2021, I think. This is the old code of the Bevy game template in the loading RS file. So this plugin is intended to handle all the asset loading. We have three resources. We have two systems. The idea is we have this game state, and during the game state variant loading, we want to start loading all our assets. We keep track of them, and when they're all loaded, we continue down here in the second state to the game state menu. In general, this pattern of a loading state during which you load all the assets, I found really nice. I wanted to work with this. But this code here was not nice to use, because whenever I had to add a new asset, I have to change this field or this line here. I have to change this system. I have to add another field to this resource. I might have to add another resource here with its own field and add it in both of these systems. Most of the time, you even have another place to change because you don't want to duplicate the file names, right? Right now here, I have this duplicated. I would move this to some kind of variable that also needs to be changed. And you see, this is a bunch of red lines. You don't want to have to do this. So I decided to move this into an external crate and iterate on the API. And since this was already cut by domain, this was really a copy paste. I created a new project, a new cargo project. I copy pasted this whole thing in it, created a little example, and then started iterating on the API. And what I want to say with this is when you see something like this, when you see any kind of pattern and you have everything already sorted by domain, consider moving it into a different crate, consider sharing it with people. This was the birth of Bevy Asset Loader. Basically, after a couple of iterations, I had a derive macro which hides most of the boilerplate and makes it really, really easy to implement loading states. So use exactly this pattern without all the red lines where you need to change things whenever you add a new asset. So with Bevy Asset Loader, this is what loading AS looks like now in the template. In the plugin, we really just configure loading state. We say, this is our state. We want to go here. We want to load those two resources. Whenever I want to add a new asset, I just need to change a single resource. I basically add two lines next to each other, one time define the file name, one time define the type of the handle, and I'm good to go. That would be it from me.
Wow, that was unexpected. I was surprised that it's over.
I don't
Niklas,
have
thank you so much.
Finished slide.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. All good. Really nice presentation, and I'm happy that you also were able to point out the asset loader, because that's obviously something else that I'm using a lot, and that I'm happy that it's already integrated into the template, because then it makes it also super easy to keep using it. So glad to see that here. And yeah, thanks again from myself, but also from a lot of other people, I'm pretty sure, for maintaining this template and making it super easy to get started in game jams and with Bevy projects in general. And also because it's sort of visualizes some of the best practices right away, right? It's like it's the best tutorial, because it's getting into my project for free.
Thank you.
So, Niklas, there's a bunch of questions. Let's get started. Do you plan to support other pipeline providers such as GitLab?
No, I haven't really thought about that, to be honest. I'm not sure how close GitLab pipelines are to GitHub ones, so maybe it would be easy to just migrate them, but I don't know.
I think it's very different, but
Then
might have changed.
I haven't really used GitLab in many years. I don't think I ever used had a pipeline on GitLab, so I'm not sure what that would mean then. And the thing is, this really started as a GitHub template, right? I showed you the easy button. So at the moment, I think this is pretty much bound to GitHub. But if somebody would take, I mean, the license is CC0, right? It should be pretty simple to just base something on the pipelines. And there's also a bunch of other templates with CI/CD pipelines like Foxtrot, or also the official Bevy CLI template.
Yeah,
Maybe one could look at those.
That's true. I just come up now that you mentioned CLI. Is there actually also a way to make this like a CLI tool as well, to generate new Bevy projects, like a Bevy CLI, to spawn that and use your project for that?
Yes, there is a way to, there's multiple tools that can do that, right? You can kind of build templates and then have the CLI that loads it from GitHub or for some other repository URL and then replaces parts in it. And I actually experimented with that. I think a while ago there was an issue open on Bevy Game Template about this. I decided against it at that moment because it just makes it harder to look at the code and directly run it. So I would always have to check out the code with the CLI tool to generate an actual working project. But yes, in theory, that would be really helpful and something useful.
Yeah. Okay, I think the next one you kind of answered in your talk already. Recommended folder file structure for source code, how to structure components, systems, resources. I guess the answer is domain driven, and not like systems into a folder or module and resources in one and such. Do you have more thoughts on that?
I mean, it's at least my opinion. I would be glad to hear other opinions and discuss it, but this is what I have come to use. And so far, I've had the best experience with this kind of code organization, yes.
Could you imagine any advantage of doing it the other way around?
Not
it really just
no.
taste? Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's a little bit simpler when you have less files, or but honestly, I'm so used to this by now that it's automatic.
Yeah. Okay, cool. How can someone find the credits in a bundled iOS app? I guess not.
Yes. No. No. This is just one small step. Yeah. This is not what would. I don't think it would be enough for really a published game on Steam, right? You probably want to show the credits from the game menu or something like that. That is not implemented in the template. It's just that the license files and so on are distributed, which I guess is also one of the things you need to do, right? You will have to distribute license files from your dependencies.
So it really just makes sure that we have it in the binary results somewhere if someone were to search for it. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. As long as you keep this credits directory up to date, of course.
Yeah. That's a good point. Isn't there also a cargo tool for that? I'm blanking now, that helps extracting that stuff?
Yeah, there is a tool. I think it can build like a combined license. So it goes through all your dependencies and the dependencies of dependencies and scrapes them all together. But that's not
Did you look into using that?
not really. I've looked at the tool, but I haven't integrated it so far.
Okay. Does it apply caching between builds to reduce the I times?
Yes, I tried. It is currently, so if you look into the workflows, there is a cache configured. I've had quite some issues with it actually. The workers on GitHub tend to run out of space. And I think it was partially due to some wrong caching setup. I think I was like sharing caches between different runs with different feature sets. But okay, actually, this is a bigger problem in, for example, Bevy Asset Loader. That's where the problems really come up because Bevy Asset Loader has quite a few features, and I test all the different combinations. In the case of Bevy Game Template, that should actually not be a problem. So there, I think there is a cache, and it works quite well.
Yeah, I guess Rust projects are in general not super cache friendly. The target folder just being gigabytes big, it's that's never great. But it's good to hear that it's in there and tested, because that's something that's probably easy to get wrong, and then it's great to have that out of the box when you base it on the game template. The next one sounds interesting when you're in game jams and you work on WebAssembly versions of your game, I guess. Does the CI generate GitHub pages versions of a WebAssembly build for me automatically?
Yes, actually, I skipped that workflow, I think. That's the only workflow not underlined in red. There is this deployed page YAML.
Nice.
And you can trigger it. Well, it's one of the workflows that you can manually trigger, and it will just take the current main branch, make a web build, and then push it to the GitHub pages of this repository. So in the case of Bevy Game Template, this is something I kind of regularly do. So if you go to the GitHub repository, there is a link also to the GitHub pages of the repository, and there's a deployed version of the template game.
Nice. That's cool. But that's probably something that if you spin off from the template, that you have to configure yourself in your fork of it then, right?
You will just have to enable.
Or is it automatically enabled?
I don't think so. It might depend on some account settings on GitHub. I'm not sure, but you can just go to the settings of the repository that you create from the template, then enable GitHub pages, and then you just trigger the workflow.
Yeah, nice.
Actually, I think the order is the other way around, because the workflow creates the branch from which you need to enable GitHub pages. So you trigger the workflow, then you get the branch, and then you enable GitHub pages on that branch.
Okay.
And then you're done.
Got
There's
it.
something in the README about it. I don't know.
Okay, RTFM, cool. Yeah, this is something that sounds familiar. Why did you opt for Kira for audio? Is it superior to Bevy audio?
Okay, yeah, this you have asked me that question a short time ago. Yes, this is at this point I would say it's historical reasons. So both Kira and Bevy Game Template are by now a few years old. I feel old talking about this. At the time when I started writing Bevy Kira audio, Bevy audio was absolutely minimal. It had a single function, play. Like you could play an audio file, but you couldn't pause, change volume, loop, or anything else. And I was told to experiment with like what the API of Bevy audio could look like outside of Bevy. So I created a separate audio plugin. That was the beginning of Bevy Kira audio. And that was also around the time I was working on the template. So obviously I wanted to use Bevy Kira audio because I had added things like looping and volume control and so on. Wanted to use it in my games, and I was using the template. So the template uses Bevy Kira audio. By now, I don't think Bevy Kira audio still has huge benefits over Bevy audio. Like Kira has some benefits, but I don't really use them. I'm not a huge audio person, although I do maintain Bevy Kira audio. So at the moment, Bevy Audio even has this ECS-centric API, and Bevy Kira Audio doesn't have it. while Bevy Kira Audio has things like channels, which Bevy Audio doesn't have. So you can decide which one to use on your own. There is by now not that big of a difference, I would say, feature-wise. The API is a little bit different at the moment, but that will hopefully change. So if I get to it, the plan is to change the API of Bevy Kira Audio to be also more ECS-centric. And there have been some attempts or some started discussions about upstreaming Bevy Kira Audio, because there's the still ongoing discussion which audio backend is the best for Bevy. And there seem to be some arguments, at least, in favor of Kira. Yeah,
Okay.
But by that time, if that happens, I don't know if that is going to happen. If that happens, I don't think there's going to be a huge difference in API. So whether you now start something with Bevy Audio or with Bevy Kira Audio, probably doesn't matter that much.
Shouldn't make a big difference then. Okay, that's good to know. I think this one is regarding the asset loader. Last time I checked, it was not clear if it also supports unloading. Does it?
Okay, it's a good question. So unloading is not something Bevy asset loader would do. Unloading is something the asset server does. So Bevy basically does reference counting on handles on assets. And if there are no strong handles left for an asset, it will unload it. In the case of Bevy Asset Loader, the only place where you will find or where you are expected to use handles to assets is inside this resource. So let me jump back to the this will be the only handle to flying.ogg. So if you remove the resource audio assets, imagine audio assets is only for the first level of your game, and you now go to your second level, then just remove the resource audio assets, and this will automatically be unloaded by Bevy. So I have an issue open for several years from myself about adding an example for asset loading and unloading.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would
okay,
maybe
but
make it a little
it's
bit
essentially
clearer.
dropping this resource manually.
Yes, and then Bevy will unload your asset.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's that should be easy enough. But that's a good catch. Is that in the README?
It might be. I can check.
Okay. When to use Bevy game template and when to use other options such as the official GitHub template?
It's a good question. The official GitHub template, I'm not that familiar with, to be honest. I have looked at it, but it has been like quite a while. So I'm not sure how much they have. I think if I remember correctly, it's a lot more minimal, at least code-wise. As far as I know, it also doesn't support the mobile platforms. I think it just comes with the 3 desktop platforms and web, if I remember correctly. So in this case, Bevy game template is maybe a little bit more complete. I would actually mention another template. So there's Foxtrot. So if you want to do something in 3D, it might be helpful to look at the Foxtrot template, because that one has an example game in 3D and has a couple of crates already integrated that you most likely are going to use in a 3D game. While Bevy game template is a little bit more minimal. I mean, the game that you get with the template really doesn't deserve the name game. It's on purpose kept really, really small, so you can just throw it away and put in your own stuff.
I don't know. Have you seen cookie clicker games? I mean, that's not much more.
Oh, I like cookie. Oh, cookie clicker. Cookie clicker is more complex than you think. There's a lot of content in cookie clicker. But no, I get where you're going at. Yeah. Yeah, just Foxtrot might be interesting for you if you do 3D.
That's a good shout out. We should put that in the slide, in the missing further question slide.